In a jaw-dropping twist, a black entrepreneur absolutely destroyed the Karen TV host with a razor-sharp response, leaving all of America in shock. The gallery lights dimmed precisely at 8 p.m., focusing all attention on the massive canvas that dominated the far wall. Angela stood in the shadows, heart hammering against her ribs as whispers rippled through the crowd. Her exhibition's centerpiece, a sprawling urban landscape in shattered angular fragments, had just been unveiled, and the silence that followed was deafening. She recognized him immediately. Even after 15 years, she would know that silhouette anywhere. Nathan Carter stood motionless before her painting, his tall frame rigid with shock. The gallery owner approached him, champagne flute extended, unaware of the invisible current, crackling between artist and viewer. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you are watching us from. We continue. Remarkable work, isn't it? The owner said. Angela's technique of fragmented perspective is revolutionary. Nathan didn't take the champagne. His eyes remained fixed on the canvas, specifically on the shadowy figure barely visible in the corner of the painting. A figure with his face where... "Is she?" His voice carried across the hushed gallery. Angela's lungs constricted. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to unfold. The painting was her confession, yes, but she'd never expected him to actually show up, to confront her publicly. After all this time. The crowd parted as Nathan turned, scanning faces until his eyes locked with hers. The recognition that flashed across his features made her legs weak. Not anger as she'd expected, but raw, unfiltered pain. "You knew," he said, the words carrying to her across the room. "You were there that night. You saw everything." The two murmurs intensified around them. Angela felt dozens of curious gazes bouncing between them, watching the drama unfold like it was part of the exhibition. Her agent materialized at her side, whispering urgently, "What's happening? Who is this guy?" But Angela couldn't speak. All she could see was Nathan's face, older now, lined with years she hadn't witnessed, but still achingly familiar. Behind him loomed her painting, a shattered cityscape depicting the night that had broken both their lives, the night of the accident, the night she'd chosen silence over truth. Nathan moved toward her with deliberate steps. The gallery guests instinctively backed away, creating a clear path between them. When he stopped just feet away, Angela could see the slight tremor in his hands. 15 years, he said quietly. 15 years I carried that burden alone. Angela's throat burned. "Nathan, please." "No." His voice cut through the air. "Not here. Outside." The weight of 2 decades of secrets pressed down on her shoulders as she followed him through the gallery doors into the cool night air. Behind them, she could hear her agent trying to recapture the crowd's attention, to redirect the evening back to art and away from whatever personal drama was unfolding. But Angela knew the truth. The personal drama was the art. Every brushstroke on that canvas was a confession, a question, an apology. And now, standing face to face with the man whose life had been derailed because of her silence, Angela realized that her carefully constructed facade was about to shatter more completely than any image she'd ever painted. Angela had always been the quiet one. Growing up in Leland, a mid-sized town on the outskirts of Seattle where rainfall provided a constant soundtrack to life, she found solace in pencils and paintbrushes rather than conversation. Her parents, her father a dedicated high school science teacher, her mother a part-time librarian with unfulfilled artistic aspirations of her own, encouraged this introspective nature, filling their modest home with art supplies and books. By 17, Angela had developed a distinctive style, ordinary scenes fractured into geometric patterns that revealed hidden emotional truths beneath everyday appearances. Her art teacher, Mrs. Calloway, was the first to recognize her potential. "You see things differently," Mrs. Calloway told her one afternoon as rain drummed against the classroom windows. "Most people look at the surface. You see the cracks, what's underneath." It was during her senior year that Nathan Carter transferred to their school. The son of African-American entrepreneurs who had opened a small technology consulting firm, downtown, Nathan was immediately different from the other boys Angela had grown up with. He carried himself with quiet confidence, excelled in both academics and sports, and possessed a genuine kindness that made him instantly popular despite being the new kid. Angela noticed him first in AP Physics. While she struggled with formulas and equations, Nathan seemed to understand the language of the universe intuitively. He noticed her frustration one day and simply slid his perfectly organized notes across the lab table. "Physics is just about seeing patterns," he said with a small smile. "Like art, but with numbers instead of colors." That simple act of kindness blossomed into an unexpected friendship. Nathan would help Angela decipher physics problems. She would sketch his profile while he worked, capturing the intensity of his concentration. They were opposites in many ways. He was methodical and precise, she was intuitive and abstract, but they balanced each other perfectly. By spring, friendship had deepened into something more. They'd stay late after school, Angela working on portfolio pieces for college applications, while Nathan solved math proofs for competitions. Sometimes they'd barely speak, content in shared silence, but the air between them hummed with possibility. That night everything changed began ordinarily enough. It was late May, just weeks before graduation. Angela, Nathan, and a group of friends had gathered at Charlotte Ryan's house while her parents were away. Charlotte, the mayor's daughter and heir to the town's oldest real estate company, had always moved through life with the casual arrogance of those born into privilege. "Come on, Carter," Charlotte had goaded, shoving a beer toward Nathan. "Loosen up for once, we're celebrating." Nathan rarely drank, focused as he was on maintaining his scholarship offers, but that night was different. College acceptances had arrived, futures were solidifying. One beer became 3 as the night wore on. Angela remembered checking her watch at midnight, suggesting they leave. But Charlotte insisted they stay for just one more round, opening bottles of her father's expensive whiskey. "To the future," Charlotte had toasted, her arms slung around Nathan's shoulders. "To the Carter family genius heading to MIT and his artist girlfriend who'll make us all famous someday." The memory of their laughter still haunted her. It was nearly 2 a.m. when they finally left. Rain had started again, slicking the winding roads that led away from Charlotte's hilltop neighborhood. Angela had offered to drive. She'd stuck to soda all night, but Nathan insisted he was fine. "I've got this," he'd said, keys jingling in his hand. "I'm barely even buzzed anymore." The crash happened on Riverside Drive, where the road curved sharply alongside the Leland River. Nathan took the turn too fast. The tires lost traction on the wet asphalt, and suddenly, they were spinning. Angela remembered screaming as the car smashed through the guardrail, the sickening sensation of falling, then the brutal impact as they hit the embankment below. What came next existed in her memory as fragmented images, the crumpled hood, shattered. Glass glittering in the headlights, Nathan slumped over the steering wheel. And then, emerging from the darkness, Charlotte's car stopping above them on the road. Charlotte and her friends clambered down the embankment, fear evident on their faces. "Holy shit," Charlotte had said, her voice strange and distant in Angela's ringing ears. "Carter's wrecked. My dad will kill me if the cops breathalyze any of us." Angela watched, disoriented and in shock, as Charlotte made a decision that would alter all their lives. "Listen to me," she'd said, leaning into the shattered window. "Nathan, can you hear me? We were never there tonight. You guys left the party early, got it? We never gave you anything to drink." Nathan, barely conscious and bleeding from a gash on his forehead, couldn't respond. Charlotte turned to Angela, her eyes hard with fear and calculation. "You understand, right? My dad's up for re-election. I can't be connected to this." Angela had nodded mutely, still trying to process what was happening. "I'm calling 911, Charlotte said, already backing away. "They'll be here soon. We were never here." And just like that, Charlotte and her friends disappeared back up the embankment, the red taillights of their car vanishing into the rainy night. The aftermath was a blur of ambulances, hospital corridors, and police questions. Disoriented and afraid, Angela had upheld the lie. Yes, they'd left the party early. No, she didn't know why Nathan had been driving so fast. No, he hadn't been drinking. But the blood tests told a different story. Nathan's BAC was well over the legal limit. With no one to contradict the evidence, he alone bore the consequences. The loss of his scholarships, a deferred college acceptance, community service, and worst of all, the crushing weight of guilt and shame. Angela had watched from a distance as his bright future dimmed. She'd tried to visit him in the hospital, but his parents, strict, hard-working and devastated by their son's apparent recklessness, limited his visitors. By the time summer ended, Nathan had withdrawn from her completely, and shortly after, his family moved away. Angela fled too, in her own way. She accepted a scholarship to an art school in Chicago, leaving Leland and its memories behind. She never told anyone the truth, not even when her nightmares were filled with the sound of crunching metal and breaking glass. Not even when Charlotte Ryan's father won re-election and their family fortune continued to grow. Instead, she channeled her guilt into her art. Year after year, her paintings became more acclaimed, her fragmented style more distinctive. Critics called her work haunting and charged with unspoken emotional tension. They had no idea how accurate those descriptions were. Now, 15 years later, for her most important exhibition yet, Angela had finally painted the truth. A massive canvas depicting that rainy night, the crashed car, the shadowy figures on the embankment. She'd never expected Nathan to see it. She'd never expected to face her silence. They walked 3 blocks, in tense silence before finding a small park, empty at this hour. Angela sank onto a bench, her elegant exhibition dress incongruous against the weathered wood. Nathan remained standing, his silhouette outlined against the distant city lights. "Why? Now?" he finally asked. "After all this time, why paint that night?" Angela's hands twisted in her lap. "Because I couldn't keep carrying it anymore." "But you did carry it. For 15 years you carried it just fine." His voice was controlled, but she could hear the undercurrent of anger. "That's not true," she whispered. "It was never fine." Nathan paced a few steps away, then back. "Do you have any idea what happened after that night? What it did to my family? To me?" Angela closed her eyes. Of course she knew, at least the public version. She'd followed his life from afar, collecting news articles, searching his name online. She knew he'd eventually made it to a prestigious university, 3 years later than planned. She knew he'd graduated with honors, started a successful tech company called Nexa Tech, but the personal cost? That she could only imagine. "Your scholarship offers were rescinded," she said quietly. "All of them," Nathan confirmed. "My parents had to remortgage their business to help pay for community college. I worked delivery jobs at night while taking classes during the day. My father," his voice caught, "my father couldn't look me in the eye for almost 2 years. He believed I had dishonored everything they had sacrificed to give me opportunities." Angela pressed her palms against her eyes. "I'm so sorry." Sorry doesn't change anything. Nathan finally sat down, leaving a careful distance between them. "What I don't understand is why you stayed silent. We were supposed to be..." He stopped, recalibrated. "I thought we were close." The pain in his voice cut deeper than anger would have. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Charlotte's family was powerful. Her father was the mayor, Nathan. And by the time I realized the full consequences of what was happening, the story was established. You'd already taken responsibility. I was just a coward." Nathan studied her face. "And now, why break your silence through a painting that most people won't even understand?" Angela turned to face him fully. "Because some people would understand. Charlotte would recognize herself if she saw it. Her father, too." "Mayor Ryan isn't mayor anymore. He's a state senator now," Nathan said flatly. "I know," Angela replied. "That's partly why I did it. He's considering a congressional run." Understanding dawned on Nathan's face. "So this isn't just about confession, it's about exposure." Angela nodded slowly. "The painting is called The Weight of Silence. It's both an apology and an accusation. For the first time, a hint of something other than pain or anger flashed across Nathan's features. Curiosity, perhaps. "How did you find me?" Angela asked. "How did you know about the exhibition?" A humorless smile crossed his lips. "I didn't know you'd be there. I live in New York now. Nexatech opened an office here last year. The gallery owner is actually a client of ours. When she mentioned a new exhibition featuring fragmented urban landscapes, something clicked. I remembered your style from high school. I looked you up, saw your photo on the gallery website, and..." He trailed off. "I was curious. I never expected to see myself in your work." Angela felt a strange calm settling over her. So after 15 years of carrying this secret, having it exposed even just to Nathan was both terrifying and liberating. "What happens now?" she asked. Nathan looked up at the night sky, barely visible through the light pollution of the city. "I don't know. Part of me wants to walk away and never look back. You had 15 years to tell the truth, Angela. 15 years where I believed I was solely responsible for ruining my life." "And the other part?" she asked softly. He was quiet. For a long moment. "The other part remembers who I was before that night, how much I cared about you, how much potential we had." His voice hardened. "But that doesn't change what happened." Angela's phone buzzed repeatedly in her clutch, undoubtedly her agent wondering where she disappeared to on the most important night of her career. "I have to go back," she said, though everything in her wanted to stay to somehow make this right. Nathan nodded. "I'm staying at the Westlake Hotel, room 1142. If you want to talk more." He left the invitation hanging between them, then stood and walked away. Angela watched him go, the weight in her chest both lighter and heavier than before. She had started this with a painting, with an image that captured a moment frozen in time. But unlike art, life couldn't remain suspended in a frame. It moved forward, demanded resolution. She returned to the gallery to find the crowd still buzzing, her agent frantic, and several red soul dots already affixed beside works in the exhibition, including The Weight of Silence. "Where were you?" her agent hissed. "The Times critic has been waiting to speak with you, and..." "Who bought the centerpiece?" Angela interrupted, staring at the red dot. Her agent blinked in surprise. "A corporate collection, Ryan Enterprises. Apparently the CEO's daughter was quite taken with it. Said something about recognizing your talent from years ago." Angela felt the blood drain from her face. Charlotte. Charlotte had seen the painting and recognized herself immediately, and her response had been to buy it, to own it, control it. Her phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. "We should talk about your interesting interpretation of history. Breakfast tomorrow? Charlotte." As she stared at the message, Angela realized that her confession had set in motion consequences she couldn't predict. The past wasn't just between her and Nathan anymore. It had become a living thing, reaching into the present with unexpected force. Across the gallery, the painting loomed, her truth now owned by the woman who had created the lie. The Ryan Enterprises building dominated the downtown skyline, 90 floors of gleaming glass and steel that seemed to pierce the clouds. Angela's reflection distorted in the revolving doors as she entered, her artist's eye noting how the curved glass fragmented her image, appropriate for how fractured she felt inside. After a sleepless night, she'd texted Nathan the situation. His response had been immediate: "Don't go alone." But this was her mess to fix, her 15 years of silence to account for. She'd come alone. The executive elevator whisked her to the 89th floor, where Charlotte's assistant, a polished young woman with a practiced smile, led her through a series of sleek corridors to a private dining room. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a vertigo-inducing view of the city below. Charlotte stood with her back to the door, hands clasped behind her as she gazed outward. She'd aged well. Her collegiate good looks had matured into the polished confidence of wealth and power. When she turned, her smile was exactly as Angela remembered, charming, calculated, never quite reaching her eyes. "Angela," she said, extending her hand. "The prodigy returns." She didn't take her hand. "Why did you buy my painting, Charlotte?" Charlotte laughed, dropping her hand casually. Direct as always. No small talk? No catching up on old times? I think we've caught up enough through my artwork. Charlotte gestured to the table where breakfast was already arranged. Please sit. The chef prepared something special. Angela remained standing. I'm not hungry. Charlotte's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Suit yourself. She took a seat, unfolding a linen napkin across her lap with practiced elegance. Your exhibition was quite impressive. You've done well for yourself. What do you want? Charlotte sipped her coffee, taking her time. I want to understand why, after 15 years of silence, you've decided to resurrect an unfortunate teenage accident through your art. It wasn't just an accident, Angela said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. It was a cover-up. Your cover-up. Charlotte set down her cup, her eyes hardening. That's a serious accusation from someone who was equally complicit. You had every opportunity to speak up back then. You chose not to. Yes, Angela acknowledged. And I've lived with that choice every day since. As have I, Charlotte replied smoothly. We all made mistakes that night. Nathan chose to drive after drinking. You chose to get in the car with him. I chose to protect my friends, all of my friends, including you two, from what could have been much worse consequences. Angela felt her composure slipping. Worse consequences? Nathan lost everything because of us. Did he? Charlotte raised an eyebrow. Last I checked, Nathan Carter is the founder and CEO of Nexatech, worth approximately $30 million. Hardly a tragic ending. You don't know what he went through to get there. We all face setbacks, Angela. Charlotte leaned forward. The difference is how we respond to them. Nathan picked himself up and succeeded anyway. I respect that. The casual dismissal of the pain they'd caused made Angela's vision blur with anger. Why did you buy my painting? Charlotte's smile returned, sharper now. Insurance. You've made quite a name for yourself. Your work is influential. People listen to your interpretations. The threat was clear beneath the civilized veneer. You're worried about your father's congressional campaign. My father has served this state with distinction for decades, Charlotte replied. His work shouldn't be undermined by an artist's creative reimagining of a teenage mishap. It wasn't a mishap, it was... The door opened, cutting her off. Angela turned, expecting Charlotte's assistant, but instead found herself staring at Nathan. The shock on Charlotte's face quickly morphed into her politician's daughter smile. Nathan Carter, now this is unexpected. Nathan's gaze swept from Angela to Charlotte. Your assistant mentioned Angela was here. I thought I'd join this reunion. Charlotte recovered quickly, rising to her feet. Of course. Please, sit. We were just catching up on old times. I bet you were. Nathan didn't move from the doorway. Angela told me you purchased her painting. Yes, remarkable work. I've always been a supporter of the arts. Nathan took a deliberate step into the room. You always were good at maintaining appearances. The tension in the room thickened. Charlotte's smile became fixed, her eyes calculating. We all do what's necessary, don't we? Some more than others, Nathan replied. He turned to Angela. You okay? She nodded, drawing strength from his presence. Charlotte looked between them. I'm sensing there's more to this impromptu reunion than nostalgia. What exactly are you two hoping to accomplish here? Angela squared her shoulders. Truth, finally. Charlotte's laugh was short and dismissive. After 15 years, who would believe you? It would be your word against mine, and frankly, Angela, your silence until now makes your credibility questionable at best. Not just her word. Nathan's voice was quiet but firm. Mine, too. Charlotte's expression hardened. Be careful, Nathan. You've built something impressive with Nexatech. Would you risk it all for some misguided attempt at justice? Over what? A DUI that you were in fact guilty of? I was guilty of driving under the influence, Nathan acknowledged. But you were guilty of providing alcohol to minors, leaving the scene of an accident, and constructing a false narrative to protect yourself. Allegations? Unprovable ones, Charlotte dismissed. Besides, the statute of limitations has long expired on any minor infractions from that night. Maybe in court, Angela interjected. but not in public opinion. Not for a family building a political dynasty. Charlotte's facade of friendliness evaporated completely. Is this blackmail? Are you threatening me? No, Nathan said. We're offering you a chance to make things right. Make things right? Charlotte repeated incredulously. What does that even mean after 15 years? Angela took a deep breath. It means acknowledging what really happened. Privately to us at minimum, publicly, ideally. And if I refuse this generous offer, Charlotte's voice dripped with sarcasm. Nathan and Angela exchanged glances. It was Angela who answered. Then I paint more. I tell my story, our story, through my art and in interviews. I don't name names explicitly, but I make the parallels impossible to ignore. And Nathan shares his experience too through the channels available to a successful tech CEO. Charlotte's expression darkened. You'd destroy my family's reputation over a teenage mistake? We're not looking to destroy anything, Nathan said quietly. But the truth matters, Charlotte. It's mattered for 15 years. Charlotte turned away, gazing out at the city she'd always expected to conquer. For a moment, Angela caught a glimpse of the frightened teenager behind the powerful woman, the girl who'd made a split-second decision that altered all their lives. When she turned back, her expression was unreadable. I need time to consider these options. You have until my exhibition closes next week, Angela said. After that, I start work on my next series. Charlotte's jaw tightened. You know, I always admired your talent, Angela, even in high school. I just never realized you'd use it like this. Neither did I, she replied honestly, but we all make choices about who we become. As they left Charlotte standing alone in her private dining room, Angela felt the weight of 15 years shifting, not disappearing, but transforming into something she could finally carry differently. In the elevator descending from Charlotte's rarefied height back to the ground, Nathan looked at her. You know this isn't over. Angela nodded. I know, but it's begun. 3 months later, Angela stood in her studio, surrounded by the beginnings of new work. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating canvases that for the first time in her career featured unbroken images, whole perspectives instead of fragmented views. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Senator Ryan had just announced he would not be seeking the congressional seat after all, citing a desire to spend more time with family and focus on charitable endeavors. The accompanying photo showed Charlotte standing beside her father at the press conference, her expression appropriately solemn. Angela set down her brush. Their private meeting with Charlotte and her father, facilitated by Nathan's attorney, had been tense but ultimately productive. No public confession had been made. That had been an unrealistic expectation, but certain truths had been acknowledged behind closed doors. Certain amends had been agreed upon, including substantial anonymous donations to scholarship funds for underprivileged students. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something, a beginning rather than an end. The studio door opened, and Nathan stepped in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Over the past months, they had carefully rebuilt something between them, not the innocent connection of their youth, but something more complex, tempered by time and shared history. You saw the news? He asked, handing her a cup. Angela nodded. It feels strange, like closure, but not quite. Some things don't close neatly, Nathan replied. They just transform. He moved to stand beside her, looking at her newest canvas. A bridge spanning. A river whole and unbroken in the dawn light. No fragments, he asked softly. Angela smiled, the expression reaching her eyes in a way it rarely had before. Not everything needs to be broken to be true. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, but inside the sun-filled studio, 2 people who had once lost each other to silence stood together in the presence of truth, imperfect and incomplete, but finally spoken.